welcome to this seminar, or if we want to call it a webinar, as the case may be, since we're doing this over the internet. But welcome to this seminar, and really great. I'm glad that you've been able to join us today. We have several VIPs here with us in the midst, and I do apologize if I happen to miss one person, but I'd like to welcome Professor Komolafe from the Faculty of Health Sciences, or from the College of Health Sciences, I should say, here at the Bafumela University. Also like to welcome Professor Philip Ogumbono from all the way from Wollongong. Let me see, have I missed anyone? Well, I'll welcome our presenter especially, but I'll just leave that a little later. So just welcome to everyone. Everyone here is a VIP. We do recognize each person, and we are really happy that you're here with us today. So without much ado, if that's okay, I'd like to just go straight to the presentation for this morning. Our presenter is Dr. Paul Sachs, and he is based in, he's a licensed psychologist based in Philadelphia in the US, and is board certified in rehabilitation psychology. He has worked as a clinician and as a nonprofit executive for over 35 years. In other words, while I was still in nursery school, he started in nonprofits as an executive. Wow. He is currently the founder and director of Reed Sachs LLC, a consulting, training, and mentoring practice in the United States. He's the author of one book, several book chapters, several professional articles in the fields of rehabilitation and corporate governance. He is well versed in the topic for today. The topic for today is what social cognition can teach us about designing human-robot interaction. In case you're wondering what social cognition is, it's a broad term that encompasses the way in which people come together and come to understand people around them. If you want, a classic example is the issue of first impression. You meet someone, and just meeting that person, you have a first impression about the person. Yeah, so that's, if you want, an example of social cognition. So social cognitive processes involve the information that is observed, perceived, and subsequent judgments that are formed by people about others in social situations. The variables that have been examined in social cognition research can be of use in understanding and designing human-robot interaction and facilitating trusting and thus productive working relationships between humans and robots. In this presentation, social cognition concepts, including attributions and schemata, are used to suggest ways that robot behavior can be designed to work best with people. So I'd like to invite Dr. Paul Sachs, to make his presentation. You're very welcome. We thank you very much for accepting to make this presentation to us, and we are looking forward to this presentation. Just a quick word before you start. For everyone who is in the seminar, we'll really appreciate it if you could take down your questions. If you have questions or comments during the presentation, you could drop them in the chat, and at the end of the presentation, they'll be addressed. However, even if you do not drop a question in the chat, we'll be glad to have a robust discussion after the presentation. So do take down your notes, do drop in questions if you have any, or just take down your notes, and we're happy to have a robust discussion after the presentation. Dr. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Akinwale. Can everyone see my screen? Can you see the screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I want to thank Dr. Ayodele also and the university for this opportunity. And let me explain a little how this came about. One of the students at the university, who is also a mentee of mine, Shegun, I don't know if he's on the call, we're both affiliated with the Prickle Academy in Nigeria. And we got to talking, and one thing led to another in terms of conversations, and now we have this talk. So let me, besides thanking everybody for participating, just say that this is really just a start of a conversation. I do not do robotics planning, and my experience is in social and clinical psychology, but I think that it is really important that we connect different areas and fields in order to make the work that we all do well-informed and most useful. So look forward to the discussion that we have, and also other ideas that may come from this. As mentioned, I, as a clinical psychologist, My first work was in the field of rehabilitation. I worked in the field of brain injury rehabilitation and at a rehabilitation hospital in Philadelphia. So I came to that perspective in terms of understanding a little more about neuropsychology and how we adapt to changes that may occur to us as a result of significant injuries. And my dissertation was in social psychology, although my degree is in clinical psychology. And so I focused on how one evaluates one's ability. So I have these various things that flow through my work experience, and I'm happy to share them with everyone here today. So social cognition, you have a brief explanation about it already. Let me just make sure that I can minimize the faces so I can just see the screen. This is a definition of social cognition, but basically we are social people and we learn about the world through our interactions with other people. Even if you are reading a book, you are learning socially because somebody wrote the book. And if you are interacting with people face to face or socially distant, you are learning about them and you are forming ideas based on them. And so this is a definition that how we perceive, analyze, interpret, and so forth. I don't like it when people read slides, so I won't do all of that. But I think a key part here is the influenced by the presence or the imagined presence of another person. And I think this is very important when we think about robotics, because even though a robot is not a person, it may elicit the imagined presence of another person. And that may in turn elicit the various ways that we think about the world and learn about the world through interacting with other people. I think I mentioned that I was not able to put all the references together in this presentation, but I will be glad to sending those to Dr. Oyedele afterwards. And of course, we can have further discussions about other references that might be relevant when we get to a later part of the presentation. So, pardon me. Only 5 a.m. here in Philadelphia, so I'm still adjusting to speaking. Naive psychology is another way that we think about social psychology and social cognition is how does the everyday person explain behavior? So I give a couple examples here. A basketball player makes a slam dunk, a child makes a rude remark, a person has a motor vehicle accident, a stockbroker's stock picks multiply by 100 times in the course of a year, a worker gets a promotion. These are all social situations, and we naively or intuitively come to some conclusions about why they happened. It is a natural process that we learn from the course of our own personal development and our life experiences, which steer us to judge things one way or the other. And the naive psychology was put forth by Fritz Heider in an important book in 1958, which I know is some time ago. It was even before I was in nursery school. Here are two quotes from it, which I think are very important. So we've already talked about that. We form ideas in everyday life. We interpret people's behaviors, and the presumed events inside the other person's skin become important and essential elements of our relationship. So when I relate to another person, there are things that I am presuming that are going on inside that person's head or body that lead me to behave in a certain way. So we cannot just focus on what is happening face to face. We'll call it the surface, because we are people that, because we are human beings and we can be both selves and objects and ourself. In other words, I see myself as an object and I'm also a subject of somebody else's point of view. These various perspectives take place and have an impact on how we interact with people. So to take the examples that I gave and just to twist them a little, I'm giving you a little more information here. A basketball player makes a slam dunk and it's the first game on home court. This information may cause you to change your judgment about how did that guy or woman make that slam dunk. Child makes a rude remark and has never had any behavior problems before. Cause you to interpret things differently. The driver was intoxicated, the stockbroker didn't do so well last year, and the worker gets a promotion, and the worker is the youngest person in the employee in the company. I intentionally did not list the gender of these people, because if I were to tell you that any of these people were a man or a woman, that would cause you to come to other conclusions about what caused this event to occur. And then if we add other variables about that, the person's background and so forth, we added more variables. So the point of this exercise here, or this illustration, is to just say that we intuitively try to figure out why things happened. And if a person is interacting with an automated machine or a robot, they are intuitively trying to figure out what's happening. And they are bringing with them their life experience and their perceptions of what happened before to that interaction. And if we are going to design human-robot interactions that are going to be productive, which I believe is the goal, or at least one goal, as well as safe, we need to think about these perspectives. So I want to talk a little more about naive psychology and attribution to give you some other aspects of it, so that we can hopefully see how it applies to human-robot interactions. Have already talked about this, but just to put it out there, we come to an interaction with various antecedents: information, our own beliefs, our motivation or drives that cause us, and we observe an event such as the ones that I just illustrated, and we come up with perceived causes about it. And then as a result of our decision or our conclusion about what we think the perceived cause is, we behave in a certain way, we feel a certain way, and we have certain other expectations. Now, while people are information processing machines of a sort, we are not sitting there going through and saying, well, let me think, why did that child misbehave? Well, they never misbehaved before. Well, I know something about their parents. Many times these things are happening more quickly. We have schemata, we have certain presumptions, and some of you may know the book Thinking Fast and Slow, and the work of Daniel Kahneman, which focuses on things that happen more intuitively or more instantly without an extensive processing. In any case, we come to conclusions when we need to, because it is a necessary survival strategy for us, and has been over the years, to understand why things happen so we know how to behave. Now, Harold Kelly from the University of California at Los Angeles, now deceased, tremendous contributor to the field of social psychology, looked at attribution. What do we attribute behavior to in a model similar to an analysis of variance statistically? We attribute it to people, we attribute it to characteristics, or we attribute it to circumstances. In this case, the figure says time. And he looked at three different characteristics that are important, or that seem to have a play in how we understand behavior, which are listed there. And the example that's listed there is one of the items that was from a research study that he did, where he presented, of course, undergraduates with scenarios and asked them to explain it. John laughs at the comedian. Also provided some additional information. Everyone laughs at the comedian. Or John doesn't laugh at other comedians, only at this one. Or John almost always laughs at the comedian. This goes back to the very first slide where I said, I gave you the example of the person had a motor vehicle accident. Then I added, he was intoxicated. I was adding information about consensus, distinctiveness, consistency. You can see that even as you're thinking about this, that based on this information, depending on what you had, consensus, distinctiveness, consistency, you might explain why John laughed at the comedian in different ways. Is it something about John? Is it something about the comedian? Is it something about the nightclub where he saw the comedian, or something else entirely? All of those are beliefs that will come to that understanding of that behavior. And then again, thinking about robotic interactions, a robot behaves in a certain way I am going to come to some conclusion or some decision about why they did, and it will affect my interaction because it is something that I perceive. One of the things that we talk about in brain injury rehab is the brain and the mind. So the eye sees, but the brain perceives. The ear hears, but the mind listens. And they are very different processes, or there are many similarities, but there are different elements to that because they involve different aspects of our neuroanatomy. Screening out other distracting information, as perhaps many of you are, although I know that many people are probably multitasking, is a type of attention, which is you can see the screen, but are you attending to the screen? Your mind is screening out other information. Likewise with social information, we are screening certain things out and focusing in on certain things, which leads us to discussion about biases. So we have certain biases based on our experience, and here are some of them. The correspondence bias, a tendency to attribute to the person and not to the circumstance. This can work in many ways, but perhaps the most or a common and troubling one is a person is unemployed. Well, if they just worked harder, or if they just worked harder to find a job, they would have found a job, as opposed to understanding maybe there aren't any jobs, or maybe that person is being discriminated against for whatever reason based on their background. So many stereotypic judgments that are made, sometimes racist judgments, are based on this correspondence bias. It's the person, if they would just work harder, they would succeed, rather than understanding the environmental circumstances that cause people to have a certain outcome. An underuse of consensus compared to distinctiveness or consistency, to just flip back. So it's more meaningful to me that John doesn't laugh at other comedians and only laughs at this one. That tells me there must be something about that comedian and not about John, or that this John is, oops, I went the wrong way, sorry. Really went the wrong way. John is consistent this way. So there is a tendency in the studies that have been done on attribution to see that. False consensus, something that we see all the time, and sorry to say often particularly prevalent here in the United States, the belief that others see it as you do, and further reinforcing that by only choosing to read information that confirms what one believes. The confirmation bias. I've made a decision, and I suddenly find all sorts of evidence that my decision was right. I'm boosting my own well-being and sense of validation by looking for things without realizing that there may be many, many other reasons that would disconfirm mine. Often you see on social media somebody who succeeded against all odds, and suggesting that therefore anybody could succeed against all odds. Again, correspondence bias, without recognizing that there are also, for that person that you just saw who succeeded, there are millions of others who tried just as hard and did not succeed. And actor-observer differences relating internal and external attributions. And this is, I think, very important when we talk about human and robotic interactions, because I know even from my limited reading that many ways that human-robotic interactions are assessed and designed is to have people view robots doing things in an environment, or to have people view others interacting with robots. And that's fine, except you need to recognize the bias. Actors tend to attribute more externally, observers tend to attribute more internally. So if I am presenting to all of you right now, and I feel I am doing a good job, I may not attribute it to my ability. I may be attributing it to external circumstances. I prepared well for this, or I was well rested last night, which I'm not. But anyway, you are looking at me and are likely to attribute things internally. And this is a very consistent difference that we see in situations. And I use Picasso's women and girl looking in the mirror as a good example. And he actually, I think, intentionally uses different colors to indicate not just that there are a different perspective, but that it will give you a different affective response, the image versus the person. So why is it that actors and observers tend to come to different conclusions about why things happen? Well, we have access to different information. As the actor, I know what's going on inside my mind and body. I know what my history is. I know what happened to me a couple hours ago. I know what happened to me yesterday, and so forth. I have historical information. You don't. You, besides, even if you knew me well, although if you knew me well, that might minimize some of the differences, you are only seeing me as a person, and you don't know what's going on inside my head, and you may be more likely to attribute things to me internally. And the other part is that we process information differently. As people, we are able to be both objects and subjects. So I am looking at my computer screen and at the camera, and I see in front of me the external environment in front of me. I am not seeing myself, figure and ground. You are looking at the screen, and you are also looking at me on the screen. So my figure as a person stands out more significantly against the environment than does the environment. So if it does, you will naturally think, well, this must be because of himself, who he is as a person, his traits, his character, his personality, as opposed to external circumstances. So this is just fascinating to me, and you see it all the time. And I hope that all of you leave this presentation, and when you're walking around and interacting with other people, you're suddenly finding that you're looking at them differently. Hopefully nobody's going to get into any problems interpersonally. If so, you can blame it on me and just say some crazy American told me this. We also see attributional differences in response to achievement activities. And this is the work of Bernard Weiner. And again, like I said, references I will put to. So let me give you an example about this. And this is relevant also to work with robotics. It's relevant in general because robots are asked to do things. They are asked to accomplish something. We utilize them. They assist us to accomplish something ourselves. Do we do it ourselves? Do we do it with assistance? So the way Weiner looked at it is we have various attributional characteristics for why things happen the way they do. They may be something that's stable. They may be something that's unstable. They may be something internal or external. We already talked a little bit about this. And so let's use the example of a student who succeeds on a test. They get 98 out of 100 points on that test, a very, very good score. Although if you ask some parents, they would say, what happened to the other 2 points? But that person may choose to explain their performance in a number of ways. They may choose to explain it in terms of something internal and stable, their ability. I'm a very good student. I really know this stuff. They may attribute it to something stable, but external. It's a fairly easy test, and I was able to get a 98 on it. They may attribute it to something internal and unstable. I studied really hard for this test, and I got a 98. Or, wow, I really lucked out, and I got a 98. And Weiner and his colleagues found that when they did measures of people who are high in achievement motivation, they tended to attribute to more internal and stable attributes, which when we think back to attributions lead to certain decisions or behaviors or feelings or expectancies, you can see how this would further support somebody's achievement. Let me present this in a different way now. Let's suppose that you are the student and you come home and you show your parents that you got a 98 on your test. Your parents may attribute it to any one of these. They may say, Paul, you're a really smart guy. They may say, Paul, you really worked hard on that test and you succeeded. Paul, I guess the test wasn't so hard. Or, well, Paul, you lucked out. And when we think about the messages that people will get over time from parents or professors or supervisors on the job regarding their performance, or feedback that a robot might provide to us regarding our work, you can see how this can lead to very different outcomes in terms of a person's motivation, in terms of a person's feeling of self-worth, in terms of a person's feelings in general, and in terms of a person's expectations for a future task. So again, like I said, the purpose of what I'm trying to accomplish here is just to provoke you to think about these, and then think about interactions that you have had or are planning in designing to how this might relate. Now I'm going to try to show this video, which is from a study that Hyder and Semmel did over 80 years, or about 80 years ago, and I believe it's very relevant. If it does not show, it's about 1 minute long, I will stop it and we'll just go on to explain it. Okay. This was one of the first studies that he did to look at the naive psychology, the attribution. So why I think this is so interesting is because, and many of you on this presentation know, there are studies done on robot swarms and how robots move, and how they move together or how they move separately, or how robots navigate, say, a museum or a mall, or lead somebody around who may be disabled. And so it's just fascinating to me that this from 1944 is still, in my mind, relevant to some studies that we might do now. So you saw a bunch of geometric shapes, and you saw really the meaning of the video is only based on what you brought to the video, because it was two triangles, one big, one small, a square. I'm sorry, a circle, and then also a rectangle, which had something that we came to perceive as a door. They were round or angular. How did they move? Did they move fast or slow? Did they move toward or against? Did they move smoothly or randomly? Again, thinking about robot swarm studies and how this is so relevant. How they interacted towards or away. That part of the video where the point of the one triangle was poking at the other triangle. And the whole sense of the environment and being inside or outside the box. How you perceived that story, and what Hyder asked the participants in this research study to understand or try to understand, is going to be brought by your various past experiences, your beliefs, and how you choose to explain that behavior. These are inanimate objects that have been made to move, and likewise, I think, are quite relevant to the work that we want to do in integrating social cognition and robotics. So these are sort of basic questions that we want to think about. What aspects of a robot's behavior are going to elicit social cognitive responses? And what kinds of responses do we want to elicit? Do we want to elicit an awareness of variability or awareness of the so-called trait or personality of the robot? And how do we design interactions that can facilitate and take advantage of what are our natural human tendencies to interact this way? So something about projection and anthropomorphism, and I have this picture of the dog. Most of you probably intuitively are looking at that dog and saying how cute, and it's the reason that humans and dogs have the relationship that we've had over centuries, I think has a lot to do with how dogs present to us. They have two eyes facing forward as compared to other types of animals, and they are able to show certain degree of expressiveness that elicits from us a sense of feeling. Now, I've grown up with dogs, and I definitely do the same, but many times you will see people talking to dogs, cats, or other animals and talking about how they feel when they really have no idea how they feel. Now, there are some people that specialize in animal medicine and animal behavior that can intuit this, but we take our approach to people and project it onto animals as well as to other objects. And this would be important, and this is something that Wright and colleagues looked at in terms of how we interact with robots. So the physical appearance of the robot, the size, is it small or large? The color, the texture, the material it's made of. I didn't put a comma there. In the case of robotic touch, which there have been some studies on that, is it a warm touch or not a warm touch? Many years ago, some of you may have learned about studies by Harry Harlow, who looked at rhesus monkeys, and he gave them two mothers that separated from their mothers. He gave them two objects to attach to. One was a wire mesh, which had a bottle of milk on it, and the other was a wire mesh covered with cloth. And the baby monkeys were attracted to the cloth mother, quote unquote mother, even though it didn't have any milk. The notion of the texture, the cloth, the warmth led them to be attracted. So when we're thinking about how to create positive interactions, productive interactions with robots, we want to think about this, and we want to think about the social presence also. So another example would be the gestures and facial expressions. Certain gestures, going back to that Hyder and Semmel video, the triangle jabbing at the other triangle, jerky movements toward that one cannot prepare for, movements that cannot be predicted, are going to lead to more suspicion and less approach between the person and the robot. On the other hand, movements that might be more predictable and speech and that appears to be more not just human, but also more expressive is likely to be important. A study was done, again, like I said, I'll get you the references, about the discord between the expressed voice of the robot and the facial expression of the robot. Now, we see this in human interactions. If I have a very stern face and I say, I'm very happy, that's very discordant to anybody, and it's very confusing, and it's frankly kind of crazy making. And it's not going to lead you to want to have more interactions with a person who behaves that way. Well, likewise, for any inanimate object that we are asking to mirror or to approximate human behavior, we want to be aware of these kinds of things. And that was sort of what I was getting at when I guess I jumped ahead of myself in my talking, is how do we create trust and between the person and the robot, and so consistency. Now, I chose this picture for a couple of reasons. The mother-child relationship is the basic one in being a human being, but look at the posture. Look at the eye connection between them. Look at the physical touch. Look at how they really form one whole of a person or of an entity rather than two separate beings. So the whole posture and relationship of this mother and child creates a unity, which is reinforced and established by the eye gaze, by the posture, by the touch. And of course, there's all the other feelings that only a mother can have towards a child, and the child sense of familiarity to the mother. But likewise, thinking about how to create trust between a robotic assistant and a human, somebody who's assisting an older person who is disabled, who is not as familiar with technology as other people would be of younger generations. What can we do to elicit that trust? And so we need to be thinking about that. So besides emotions and actions and consistency between gestures and behaviors, want to think about modalities that would fit the environment best. So I think about my work in brain injury rehabilitation and how people learn. We all learn in different ways. Some of us are visual learners. Some of us are verbal learners. Some of us say, don't tell me what to do. Don't show me a diagram. I mean, don't show me a diagram, just show me, let me do it myself. Let me figure it out with my hands and figure out how this thing works. We need to keep in mind what modality might be best for the human and the robot to engage in. And that means knowing something, one, about the person themselves. What modality do they learn best in? If they have limited visual cues because they are older or because they have visual impairments or hearing impairments, clearly you would not want to be using those you would not want to be enhancing those kinds of behaviors or those kinds of aspects of robot behavior as much. On the other hand, there may be particular modalities that work. And then thinking about the environment itself. In a situation where there are a lot of people and there is a lot of ambient noise, there may need to be other cues that are visual as compared to verbal or kinesthetic or movement that are important to keep in mind. So, and then I also add this, which I also came from another study, which I thought is appropriate. How the computer responds to the other person, to the person, is no response better than the wrong response. Sometimes it is. In other words, sometimes a neutral response is better until you can get more information. And we all know this from our own social interactions. If you go into an unfamiliar situation and you're interacting with somebody and they are inscrutable and you can't figure out what makes them tick, you're probably going to be very cautious about what you would say to them. You might choose some very neutral topics to talk about, say you were at a social gathering, until you get a little more cue about what would be the right thing to do in this situation. Or you might simply leave it and say, I'm going to keep it completely superficial. I'm not going to get into it with this person. And then you'll find somebody else at the social gathering to talk to that you can engage with better. So when we think about what we are trying to, in response to a certain behavior, what do we want the entity robot to do? We want to think about making sure that we don't make a mistake, which might set us back a number of steps, as opposed to a very neutral response to gather more information. Studies have been done about in terms of how people perceive robots. And again, I think my audience knows more than, well, I know my audience knows more than me about this, but I'll just thinking about how I've been trying to think about this presentation. I thought an interesting study was done regarding watching individuals watching a robot being damaged by perhaps another robot. I can't remember the details of the study, and the sense of sympathy that observers had watching that, even though it's a machine. And yet they were they expressed strong degrees of emotional reactions to a video of a machine a robot being damaged. Now it depends on how much connection they felt with that robot. It depends on what kinds of connections were elicited beforehand. But the fact is, we project our feelings onto all sorts of things. Another example that I use is if you go to the movie theater, in talking to people, explaining it, students that I work with, if you go to a movie theater, you're watching the screen. The movie is not on the screen. The movie is back there in the projector or behind or whatever. You're seeing a projection of what's on the screen, but you treat it as though it is a genuine thing that you are seeing. And the distance between what might be quote unquote real and what might be perception is very, very thin. Likewise, in terms of emotions, you walk in and you meet somebody and you say, you look like you're angry. Well, maybe they're not angry at all, but you're angry. It's easier for you to see it in the other person than to recognize it in yourself, the actor-observer difference. Looking at how robots work together as a group, this goes back again to the Hyder and Semmel study, or that example, as well as other things related to robot swarms. Are they moving together? Do they appear to be moving together? You see a school of fish. They're moving together. You see a flock of birds across the sky. They're moving together. If you see things acting in more unpredictable arrays or something is going awry, it's concerning, and it's also confusing. And it leads us to come to different conclusions about that, and different conclusions about whether we can trust this group to go along with them to, if I have a robotic guide in a museum or something like that. I'm not sure I want to follow along if the thing is behaving in such an erratic way. I think it's very important to talk about bias in general, and it's also important in terms of creating algorithms. So I wanted to say something about this here. Clearly, bias is something that psychologists focus on a lot. We ought to. And so I think it's important to mention these points here as we talk about this discussion and just bring it to the forefront that we are never going to design anything that's completely objective. There's no scientific objectivity. And I hope that some of the things I talked about have pointed that out. It is always the person that is creating the algorithm. It is always the person that wrote that book. It is always the person that comes to that conclusion. We try to eliminate it as much as possible in scientific research. We try to reduce random effects. We use statistics. We use measures to try to eliminate. We do controlled studies. We have referee journals, but we cannot get around the fact that it is a human person, a human being, with all of the biases that we bring that is involved in the project. And so likewise, when we're thinking about designing algorithms in general, as well as designing robot behavior, which are driven by algorithms, we need to remember that many of the people, if not the large majority of the people who are doing that sort of work are men, probably white men. And so would that lead to certain biases in terms of how things are designed? Also, adapting the algorithm to how it's used in the real world. There was an interesting article I read, which I think typifies this, an algorithm that was used to judge x-rays from hospitals, which x-rays were fractures and which ones were not, and found out that the algorithm was very, very successful in identifying which were fractures. However, the way the algorithm was being used was one hospital 90% of their x-rays were fractures. Another hospital, 10% of their x-rays were fractures. So the algorithm was identifying the hospital, not looking at the actual x-ray as a way of bringing their judgment. So we need to really test, and I think all of you on the call here in the presentation know this better than I do. We need really to test our algorithms to see whether there are biases that are leading us. Now, I also came across these two things that I would like to share with you. This is the, I'm not going to sign everybody up here. An organization that focuses on algorithmic justice and the fact that there are, certain biases that way. Now I have to just put my glasses on to figure out how I can get out of here. And Black in Artificial Intelligence, an organization that recently was established. Some of you may be members of it, and is important to recognize, again, facilitating the diversity of the population. And I know my hat, even though I'm not wearing one, goes off to Dr. Ayodele for establishing the artificial intelligence group at the university. And I hope that my work here and our work together leads to further development so that we can further enhance the diversity, as well as not just of who's participating, but also the outcomes and the data and the studies that are generated. And the last thing that I want to mention regarding bias is when we are getting to a point where robots are working side by side with humans, and we are at that point in certain industries, what does that say about how we're going to judge human behavior? So if you're in a warehouse and you have a robot that is sorting things, and there is another worker that is sorting things, and that human worker is doing something very similar to the robot, or perhaps similar enough, and you are the supervisor, and you are really relying on that robot and know that they're not going to take sick time, although they could get damaged. They're not going to get into various human resource issues, of which I have dealt with many, as compared to your human worker, and you need to evaluate performance. Are we going to become biased in terms of how we judge humans? Are we going to bring our new attributional biases to judgment of human behavior based on our extensive experience in interacting with robots? This is one of these dystopian ideas of, at a certain point, people are expecting humans to behave more like robots as opposed to recognizing our humanness. But I point it out here because it is something that we need to be thinking about when we are trying to get robotic interventions into human environments. We want to be sensitive to how that interaction plays out and how it is perceived by an outsider. So just to wrap up in terms of some other recommendations, inviting people into the early stages of development in your robotics, I think, is very key. And I hope that I've made that, at least that point here, is that people are going to bring, of course, their biases, their attributions, their beliefs, but they're going to bring a lot of useful information about how things are perceived and assess their perceptions. So while it's fine to have a focus group, it's fine to have a group of people observe a video of a robot behaving in an environment, but also perhaps some concrete assessments so that we are not making judgments just based on qualitative observations as well as quantitative. Being aware of actor-observer differences, I've talked about that. And environment. One of the things that I've learned in rehabilitation and I carry with me is how important the environment is. And I'll give you this very brief example, which I use when I'm talking about brain injury rehabilitation. If I were to ask you to come to my kitchen and prepare your favorite dish, you would show a lot of behaviors that looked like you had a brain injury. And that would be, you would do things out of order, you would drop things, you would mess things up, you would get angry, you would lose patience, you might break something. And there's nothing about you that has anything to do with your brain. It's all the environment. My kitchen is set up to elicit the behaviors in me that I can do things. I have it organized. Your kitchen is set up your way. If you and I change environments, we are not going to be able to demonstrate our cognitive and emotional control abilities as well, because the environment is different. So we always need to be thinking about that. And this again gets to the figure ground, actor observer kind of thing. We tend to focus on people. Psychology focuses on people, but we are people in an environment. We are in a social environment. We are in a large environment. We cannot ignore it. And if anything, perhaps we should be looking at that first rather than the people that are in it. So with that, I want to thank you, Dr. Udeli and the university, and be happy to take questions. I've included my contact information, and also, as I said, I will also share references after this too. So thank you all very much for your attention, and I look forward to our further discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paul. We really do appreciate you. I think this has been a very, very interesting talk. I personally have really enjoyed it. While you were presenting, Professor Gumono mentioned that he's a member of Black in AI. Is it Black AI or Black in AI? Yes. He's a member of that. So I said, okay, that's interesting. I didn't even know such a group existed.
No, I'm not a member. I'm not a member. I know I came across it, and so.
Yep.
But now that you called me out, I need to join. So.
You know, I am a member. I joined it.
Oh, you're a member. Oh, okay. Great. I'm happy to hear that.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, and I think Shegun Akini, you also just mentioned that he also is a member.
Yeah, yes, he told me that yesterday.
Okay. There's a comment in the chat. Grace Lasheri mentioned that the essence of the environment cannot be overemphasized. Grace, do you want to speak to that?
Hello, everyone. Good morning.
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 Okay, so I joined the call quite late, but I mean, the parts of the conversation I met. Hello?
Yeah, Grace, go on.
Yeah,
the echo has gone.
Okay, there's an echo. Okay. Okay, so I was saying, I met the conversation where Dr. was talking about the biases involved in these initiatives and the recommendations, right? And an environmental specialist, it really cannot be
sorry. So just pause a bit. Dr. Adele, I think your mic seems to be giving us the echo. Okay, I think it's better now. Yes, Grace, please go on.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, so I was saying that I joined the conversation quite late, but the part of the conversation I met where recommendations were being given just after biases had been treated, it was quite enlightening because as an SDG advocate, I've always believed that the environment is at the core of every innovation, every invention, every interaction, even as regards interactions between AI and humans, right? Environment is at the core, and that's why I said that the essence cannot be overemphasized, because I really don't want to go into so much details, but it's very, very important to always make sure that people are aware and conscious of their environment, because all of these inventions will not thrive if the environment is not well suited, or these things are not made to adapt to the environment. I don't know if I've made sense.
Yeah,
but those are just some of my thoughts.
No, thank you. I think it's very, very important. And you know, when I think about my rehabilitation experience, if somebody has steps to get into their house versus a ramp, that can make a difference about whether they can go home or not. And so the environment is critical, and
Very
we
critical.
design our environment
Exactly.
to
We
get the
designed for
best
the
of
environment.
ourselves.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir.
Uh,
So
Okay,
I have a
thank you.
quick question.
Yeah, sure, go on.
Okay, so one of the constraints that I have observed with adapting innovations in AI to environments like Africa or Nigeria is language bias. So are there initiatives or are there plans in place or maybe being planned to help local citizens get more educated with their local language, to use such inventions? Like, for example, if you create a robot, right, that I mean, most of the solutions that we have seen in this space are usually in languages that are more global, and to adapt such innovations to this climate, to this environment, there's actually, I think there will be constraints of language. So what's been done concerning this?
I don't know
Dr.
if
Paul,
that
do you have any
question is
thoughts on
for
this?
me or the rest of the audience. I think it's important that people be able to understand the robots. So we do need to be thinking about that.
can I just sort of maybe make a few comments about the?
Yes, I was going to call you to help out.
Yeah. Several things crop up in that comment made by
Grace.
Grace. Yes, Grace. Thank you very much for bringing that up. There are several things that sort of come up in your comment. The first, let's talk about the environment. I have several questions and comments that I want to make about that myself later on, and I'll take time to do that in time. But when you talk about environment, there are several aspects of it based upon what you said. One part of it is the environment in which the robot is meant to interact with people, how it's able to understand what is actually happening in its environment. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that or make some comments about that. The other point is when you say the local environment, I'm not too sure I fully understand what you mean by that. Maybe you want to maybe elaborate when you say the local environment. What is that?
So what I mean by that is just as a case study, maybe let me use Nigeria or your state or even OAU, Ife, for example. I mean, there's great disparity between where the environments that those robots are used to as regards maybe roads.
Oh, we lost the voice.
Okay, I was wondering if it was my own network.
Oh, that's network. Okay.
Yes, I think it's my network. The environment at work, I guess. At work. Okay, Grace, I don't know if you can hear us. Your network seems to have gotten it to poor. I guess the point she was trying to make is the fact that when a number of robots are made and trained, they tend to be trained for specific environments. And if one wanted to deploy them in a different environment, for example, in Nigeria, where the environment itself would be different. Maybe I could take an example, self-driving cars. Self-driving cars are localized to different places because in driving in different states within this country, I realized that drivers tend to drive differently. Or maybe it's my perception of their driving that is somewhat different. So I guess that's a point about when robots are made, there might be a need to adapt them to the specific environment where they are to be used.
Yes, exactly. So I got cut short. Yes, exactly.
Okay. All right. Okay, I understand what you mean now. But in my own understanding of how you want to think about the whole life cycle of a robot. Even if you want to make a robot to work on a factory floor, if the robot is not, if the environment are not the same, you still need to do some fine tuning to make sure that it sort of adapts itself to the local environment. There's a phase in which it has to learn and actually understand what it's actually sensing. So to just say that you pick some kind of robot from, say, Germany, and you want to deploy it in Nigeria, I think it would be foolhardy for anyone to do that. In fact, I would say the person does not actually understand how robots work. That's why they want to even contemplate doing that type of thing. There has to be a situation, a phase where you actually fine tune or make sure that you can call it transfer learning, where based upon what it has already learned, it then adapts its own learning to what the new environment is before you can actually make it to work in that new environment. So that's the normal practice. So definitely. I don't see personally, I don't see any problem in that kind of deployment issues, so long as people understand how robots are meant to be, the limitations of robots, and how they're meant to be deployed in different environments. So I'm not too sure if that really addresses the issue you raised about environment.
Yeah, so that's where I now came in with the language perspective, that if robots are going to learn to be adapted to environment, are there language plugins? How are they going to, how do people even understand how they're used? I mean, so it's
okay. Let me say something about that. Okay, say for example, right now, I don't know if you know about some of the work being done by people like Google Minds, DeepMind in Google, or people like Deep AI. There's a model called, there's something called the GPT. There's a model 3 right now. It's a kind of language model that sort of tries to encapsulate model language, I said, but essentially it's like it's a English language. But more recently, there's the Wudao, the Chinese version of it, which was trained on Chinese language and English language. I think they say it's close to about, say, 1.5 trillion parameters it was trained on to be able to understand human language in that language. So it's up to us if we want to sort of incorporate our language to actually do, and that's where the government funding comes in. These are big projects. It's not a kind of small laboratory project. These are big projects and with using supercomputers and that kind of stuff to be able to say you model Nigerian languages, for example, so that a robot can actually reason in that language. If you haven't trained it with that kind of language, it cannot reason in that language. It's impossible. It needs a language model, and that needs to be built. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And I think the just to add, I mean, I think I was just going to say, I think the point about the self-driving.
Yeah, I didn't mention that there was a chat.
I was just going to say, the self-driving cars, I think, is a very good example, because when they and everyone should know, I've been to Africa 3 times, so I know the traffic in Africa is different than it is in the States. But in any case, you know, in terms of how it's not just a matter of following the laws of and the driving customs. You need to be thinking about other environmental things that people will notice when they are driving that a machine may not pick up, and we need to adjust that way. So, sorry.
Indeed. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. Okay, I think there are a couple of questions in the chat. I'd like to pick those up now, if that's okay. The first, I think, was from Akinola. He said, in building a robot, what psychological aspects are to be considered?
Okay, so I did have a prior slide about that. We want to be thinking about what it looks like, because we want to be thinking about, well, let's just say generally, one's familiarity. And if we're talking about we'll call it a humanoid robot, if we want to elicit the sense of trust and connection between the person and the robot, the degree to which it is reliable, the degree to which it is predictable, are going to give us all more confidence. The same sorts of things that would lead us to feel a sense of trust in other persons. If somebody behaves in an unpredictable way, then I not going to feel as trusting of them to work with me on a given task. The other thing that I mentioned in the slide is the degree to which it there have been some studies that look at materials that are used, the size of the robot, the color, and those would be aspects to keep in mind. Perhaps depending on the situation that you had, you may want to assess the target population beforehand to get some sense of what their level of familiarity with robotics in general or with a particular robot would be. And that's again, where watching a video and giving me your comments about how do you think you would do in a situation like this? So those are my initial responses to that question.
Okay, thank you. If I can just put it right down that it makes quite an amount of sense that the specifics will be dependent on the application to which the robot is to be put to use. For example, if it's to be a care robot in a hospital, the considerations and concerns might be different from if it were a robotic dog I wanted to send on a rescue mission. That's just a thought. Agreed. Okay, thank you. Then there's a second question also from Akinola. He said, in the field of psychology, do the concept of EEG, that's electroencephalography, EMG, and ECG, have any correlation with the field? If yes, in what ramifications?
Well, I'll think out loud about that question.
Okay.
So in the field of brain injury rehabilitation, for which I have worked a number of years and a number of my publications are related to that. It used to be, before we had the advantages of CAT scans and other types of advanced scans, that it was most valuable to do an assessment of the person's behavior, a lot of psychological testing, which I did. Now with the advances in technology, we don't really need that to determine if somebody has a brain injury or a brain impairment. But it's still very important to assess their behavior. So an EEG will not tell you how the person learns best. An EEG will not tell you, or a CAT scan, will not tell you whether the person is going to attribute a given event to circumstances or to some other aspect of a person's personality. So I think it's useful correlation information, and it may be helpful in developing our understanding of the data that we get from scans, but I know I'm biased as a psychologist, I'm focusing on behavior. And I'd say, and as I mentioned, I'm a nonprofit manager, there was plenty of psychology in that too. So it's all about behavior for me. So I don't know if that answers, if there's a follow-up comment or question, I'll be happy to try to answer it.
Okay, Akinola, I hope that's okay. Yeah, Akinola, you want to comment, or if that's okay, if that's okay, that's fine. If you want to put it right there, we're happy to take it in the chat as well. If you want to use your voice, that's also fine. Okay, thank you. Mr. Kalagumba also has a question. He said, to what extent can we model human behavior for replication in robots? Can we model a more subjective matter like emotions, for example, for instance?
Well, I believe that people are trying to do that now. And I believe that we will be able to do that as we, have more advanced experience in algorithms. So I believe that would be a goal, to create emotional behaviors, let's put it this way, behaviors that mimic emotional responses. So we are not going to be able to create feelings. Well, now we're going to start to get a little philosophical, but we're not going to create feelings in robots. Our emotions are the result of the electrochemical things that happen in our nervous system, moderated by our experience and our environment. The robot, whatever algorithms or quote unquote wiring it has and environment is not going to experience the world in the same way, certainly not in 2021. But can the behaviors that the robot demonstrates, which seem to mimic sadness, happiness, pride, joy, fear, be close enough approximations that it will allow the person to feel confident that they can connect to the robot in a different way than just the task. I think that would be a valuable goal.
Okay, thank you. And there are a couple of raised hands. I think I want to take the raised hands now, and then maybe I may get back to the chat a little later. Let me start with Prof. Ogumono.
Oh, I think Dr. Ayodele raised his hands first.
Okay, okay, Dr. Ayodele.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Akinwale. Please confirm that my volume is okay.
Yes.
Yes, it's fine.
I'm using my mobile phone and I'm not, okay, all right. Paul, thank you very much for your presentation. It was actually very thought-provoking. Actually, it's interesting because it actually hits one of the things we are working on now. So one problem we are looking at is how to evaluate how sustainable rehabilitation robotics can be in Nigeria and in Africa generally. And clearly, some of the important problems here have to do with whether we have the infrastructure, the know-how, but very importantly, the cultural issues. And for the cultural issues, we are using something called technology adoption models, which there's an example called the UTAT. I won't go into that. But that model uses things like perceived usefulness, perceived ease of use, attitude towards the device, behavioral intent, and actual use to kind of quantify how technologies are adopted or accepted by users. And what became clear to me from your presentation is that we'll need to rework our planned questionnaires for our information instruments, because we haven't factored in these the difference in your attributional measures. So currently we are looking at the things we are looking at. We are trying to evaluate both from the patient side and from the clinician's perspectives. But on both sides, it occurs to me that we're actually focusing on the actor-focused measures, and the observer-focused measures are actually not taken care of. So that this actually would help us in improving that model. So I want to thank you once again. So I have a question, and it links to you raised two interesting questions. The first one was, what aspects of the robot design or of the robot will elicit social cognitive response? And I think that's a very interesting question, because as you were talking about that, it occurred to me that there might actually be a nice study that one can actually raise based on this. And the question would be, how might we go about constructing a framework for allowing humans to attribute personality to robots? I'm not a psychologist, but I'm aware there's this big five in psychology of there's conscientiousness, neuroticism, openness, and there are two others. So it occurred to me that one might actually want to look at creating a framework like that for allowing a more open and a more open way of assessing robot behavior, of attributing behavior to robots. So I'll be interested in hearing your thoughts about this. How might one go about creating a framework similar to the big five in humans for robots? I think you've already mentioned some things that I think will be good elements, what it looks like, because I can imagine, for example, that a robot that has a support system that looks like two legs spread apart, that is red and that is moving at a very rapid pace, might be, to Dr. Ogumba's question, might elicit in the human the emotion that the robot is angry. I'm just speculating here. So I imagine there are elements that would actually go into such a framework. So I would like to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I'm going to have to just think out loud. I think, and I'm also getting somebody can mute. Is that better? Yeah, I think it is. So I'll have to think out loud about it. I think it's an important question. I think it's something that would be very exciting to do. I'm thinking about would we be interesting to to demonstrate to observe or to have a robot behave in a certain way and have people complete some kinds of personality trait measures and say, you know, if you were going to measure this person, do you think this person, you were going to measure this, if this robot were a person, how would you evaluate their personality? And we would have various characteristics that are, we'll call them traits of people, shy, gregarious, timid, confident, and then see what we come up with. So that would be purely exploratory based on certain sample of robotic behavior. So that's one thought. I guess the other thought is what are the aspects of the robotic behavior that elicit social cognition? They are the things that will they are the things that will approximate human interactions, and the different aspects of it. So I might choose to think of categories of human interactions: mother-child, husband-wife, supervisor-employee, store owner, customer, and try to come up with a, and there may exist this, categorization of the behaviors that describe the interaction between, say, the store owner and the customer, and then try to think about how to apply those to the robot, and then assess observations or judgments about the robot's personality. Those are my initial thoughts. Like everyone else on this call, we'll all be thinking a lot afterwards.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Adeli, you have a follow-up on that, or do I move on to Prof?
I think I'm okay. It's something we'll keep on discussing, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you. Prof. Ogumana.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Akwale. Paul, thank you so much for this talk. And I think you probably, during our small discussion via email, I did tell you about my interest in this type of discussions, because at the junction of two disciplines, interesting things happen, I said. One of the things that crossed my mind while you were giving this talk was the issue of social cognition. In the way we get into this, is there a motivation based upon reward?
Can you restate, say a little more?
Okay,
please?
so for example, well, I'm in this this seminar right now. There's a motivation for me, and there's and it's in most of the case, I can almost say there's a reward-based motivation somehow, because I have some kind of reason why I want to be in this seminar. For example, if you look at this interaction as an example of, say, social cognition in a way, for example. So what I'm going to is if we can sort of look at social cognition as being motivated by reward, so the actors by some kind of reward in a way, we might have a kind of a means of trying to instrument it in a robot, because for the robot to be able to interact with humans in that kind of social cognition perspective, there has to be some kind of a framework that supports it, and for us to be able to instrument it. Some of the things that cross my mind is, say, for example, if I say I want to use reinforcement learning to be able to motivate that, a situation whereby the robot sort of learns from its environment, so certain things are okay, certain things are not okay, and begins to learn about what is acceptable in this environment, and then it can then actively and positively participate in that environment. So that's the basis of my question about is it mediated by reward is social cognition, is it mediated by reward?
I would say that, well, it's probably both, but what I was going to say for starters was that actually I think reward is mediated by social cognition, but it's probably interactive. The slide that I had early on where I had the 3 boxes of the antecedents, the attributions, and the consequences, we bring certain expectancies to interactions. And then we, based on what happens, or based on not just what happens, but our interpretation of what happens, leads us to certain level of motivation or future expectancy of that. Reward is one part of that. Now, I would say, supporting your point, that generally the sense of what's called self-efficacy, the sense that we feel, the sense of feeling competent, of having accomplished something, is generally rewarding to people. We want to accomplish something. We want to feel we did a good job. Now, if we think we did a good job because of who we are or because of something about us, that's going to lead us to try to do more similar types of things. If we think that it's something that we had no control over, then that would be another thing. And locus of control, there's a whole literature on locus of control, internal versus external. And again, of course, it's never completely one or the other. So those are really my thinking out loud about it. I'll stop there before I get myself deeper into the mire.
No. I mean, that has been very, very helpful, because we get my motivation for that question was simply, if I were to design a robot that will have those attributes, two things came to my mind, and I'll talk about the next one in a short while. The first one was, say, okay, I put a robot that is endowed with some kind of reinforcement learning paradigm, so that it can sort of act and possibly in a short while know where it gets some reward and say, well, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. And it wants to maximize the reward, which is what you say in terms of locus of control. I want to know that I have self-efficacy. So because the more reward you get, you feel, okay, I'm doing the right thing in this environment, I'm acceptable, I'm doing what's according to the norms of that environment. So I'm just sort of thinking to myself that if I want to instrument this, perhaps what I need to be thinking about seriously is reinforcement learning paradigm that will allow a robot placed into an environment to probably have a learning phase, for example, after which it has probably acquired some knowledge, so to speak, to know how to behave, and then go into the second phase of actually now acting and trying to sort of accomplish tasks. Because I would imagine that we humans, even as a baby, we begin to learn through reinforcement learning. Parents say, that's okay, that's very nice, or that's not good. And we forget very quickly that even humans have to learn before they can act in an environment appropriately.
Right. Well, I was going to just say, what is the reward? That's one thing you have to think about. What is rewarding? So there are certain things that are rewarding to us that would have to be mimicked in the robot, in terms of, I guess, what's the word? Strengthening that connection. So that would be, in effect, the reward. The other thing that we have to think about, there's two comments about what you're saying, but then, sorry to interrupt you, that a lot of human learning is done by observation, social modeling. So it's not, you do the task, you get it's not linear. It's much more global, learning how to behave in a certain situation. You're picking up a lot of different cues from your, hopefully, colleagues or parents about how to behave, and then there are many situations like that. And then the other comment that I wanted to say to you about regarding the goals is, I think about focusing on the end point. In other words, where do you want to be at the end of this interaction? If you have a meeting, what do we want to accomplish by the end of this meeting? Which is unfortunately true in the States and probably in Nigeria too. Very little attention is paid to that, and you end up having a meeting and you never know what actually happened at the end. But one ought to be thinking, where do I want to be at the end of this meeting? What do we need to accomplish? And now let's back up and take the steps that need to accomplish that task. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably unlike humans, for robots, we need to sort of define goals for them to be effective, because it can't just be aimless with the way the algorithms work anyway. And thank you very much for shedding a lot of light on that. The second question I wanted to raise, or should I say, I won't call it a question, it's a kind of comment in a way that I want you to probably also address, is the issue of when we're talking about the experience that we bring into an environment that allows us to be able to interpret it and be able to sort of make some kind of sense of what's going on, or what to attribute to have some attribution about what is around us. That also has to do with what we bring into that environment. That means some kind of a pre-knowledge, so to speak. And my mind was going about, how will I instrument that? How will I make that happen? And the only thing that came to my mind was a kind of a Bayesian inference situation, whereby I can talk about likelihood, I can talk about prior knowledge, and I can say that what I really want to get out of that is my posterior, so to speak. So do you want to comment on that? And to what extent are we able to actually measure those things? I mean, are they measurable? The things that become our prior knowledge, for example, the prior itself, how can we measure it? How can we quantify it from a psychological point of view into a kind of numeric form?
Well, I think the idea of Bayesian statistics and a Bayesian approach is a really good one, because of how it addresses the notion of probability, and I think that probably would be a great way to approach some behaviors. But then we go back to the to the point that not all of this is conscious. And so we are not sitting there calculating the likelihood that there is, thinking fast and slow. There is the intuitive processing that happens. There are the schemata that we bring to it, that I have in my mind a schema of an interaction that's based on my past experience, and something in my new environment elicits that schema. An example might be, the person reminds me of my mother. Which I know goes both ways, positively or negatively. And I find myself interacting with that woman in ways that I didn't think through, but just sort of came out. So I do think that I think it's a little of both. But for many things, I do think that a Bayesian approach and thinking about how people calculate, I mean, not so deliberately calculate, but what are the probabilities that a given behavior is going to lead to a given reaction, I think is a very productive way of thinking.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
As a writer to that, I was going to talk about, you did mention something about, say, something reminds you of, say, your mom, and then you behave in a particular way. Is that a kind of a generative model whereby, say, for example, we say there's a kind of a probability distribution that describes certain behaviors, for example, and I sample that, and from there I pick up an appropriate type of behavior, because I have a probability distribution that describes possibilities, so to speak. And what I'm doing at any point in time is sampling from there to see how appropriate they are. Is that what's happening, or is that?
No, I think that's. I think that goes back to my thought about the selecting types of interactions that people have frequently.
Right.
The customer and the salesperson, the teacher and the student, all sorts of situations. And so coming up with some kind of taxonomy of behaviors that are typical or most probable in an interaction. And really, in my work with human services, this is, this is customer service. You need to be prepared for, and you eventually develop your own sort of library of experiences of the person who calls to complain about this, or the person who wants such and such, or the person who is eager to please you, and you're not really sure why they're even talking to you, if other than to just make you happy. So I think that coming up with some sort of taxonomy of typical reactions and then trying to map that into robotic behavior could be another way to go. Right.
Based upon what you just said now, can I just sort of pick your brain on the following? And that is what you've described now to some extent sounds symbolic processing as against numeric processing. Because say, for example, if you say symbolic as in say, I've got people behave this way, and I just capture that as it is, as people behave in a particular way, as against trying to sort of say, for example, I have a robot, or should I say I have some algorithm that can sort of look at people's facial expression and look at all the facial action points and codify them in some kind of a numeric form and say, this means happy, this means anger, this means dissatisfaction, this means whatever, in a way. That is another form, in a way, as against just look at the picture. Now, to what extent do you think we have progressed towards quantifying things in numeric form? Because that's how robots work best, as against because symbolic AI has been discredited a long time ago. We're more in the area of numeric type of stuff now. So, and the bridge would be to be able to put in numeric forms, have sensors that can actually sense things and give us numerical values. So, can you say a few things about that?
I don't know if Phil is still on, but this relates to your study on facial recognition.
In a way, yes, it does.
So yes, I think there are ways to do that, and I agree. It does need to be. We need to figure out how to quantify it. I also want to say something just because it's relevant regarding facial recognition in terms of bias, that I believe there are some studies to indicate that facial recognition generally works well with white men and doesn't work as well with other with women, as well as persons of color, and there's a lot more work, and that goes back to the bias, and it goes back to the models, and it goes back to the numerical models that we have. So if we're going to do that, we got to make sure that it's relevant to how it's being used. But I do think that there are ways to identify that, and the mathematics is way beyond me.
Well, but what you've given us hope anyway that it is possible. That's a key point.
All right, fair enough. All right.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Paul. I really appreciate this.
Thank you for your comments too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Thank you very much. Shagma, I think you have your hand raised.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. So here's my question. As a psychologist, so how do you think clinicians and engineers like us can persuade or convince subjects to use robots that are indigenous to Nigeria or Africa? Take, for instance, from my short experience in our current trial, we have old people come around to use the robot. That's subjects that we recruited. They feel so enthusiastic to use the robot because they believe it's a machine from a white man that can help them. Then I'm now trying to imagine if I happen to be one of those subjects. Imagine Shegun, who schooled in Cambridge and is coming to Nigeria to get rehabilitation on a robot that is being developed in Nigeria. And it was told that it's Nigerian engineers that developed the robot. How do you think such scenario can be handled? Do we necessarily need a psychologist, or there is a method, or there should be a way we go around it? I'm asking this question for two reasons. First, is it necessary that that should be handled from the stage of recruitment if it's about clinical trials? And also, if we eventually get to cases of deploying these robots for commercial purposes, how do you think we can, because I know there will always be biases. So how do you think, let's start from the trial in this case now, how do you think you can persuade subjects who are educated and who have this bias that, oh, I don't think this thing can help me? Because I've had cases like that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think it's great that the university is and the Applied Artificial Intelligence Lab. This is, promoting the local talent, and that will help to some degree. But I think that the biases or the fear are probably prevalent regardless of where the particular robot was created. The whole notion of adapting to change and accepting change, I think as people become more familiar, that is important. Modeling, seeing other people who have successfully used it is also a way of applying it. So having perhaps creating some vignettes where you are able to use as training or orientation. Say you were going to bring a given robot to a community in Nigeria. I might want to prep them by having them see a video, not obviously, but having hands-on experience with it as opposed to just on a screen is very important too. And people, while people are fearful, we are over evolution are attuned to novelty. And so that is, every marketer knows this, that you tell somebody to buy something, tell them it's new. Now, some people don't want the new, they like the old, but we are attuned to focus on novelty, and we need to see what the results are. And so it is a slow process, and we all know about there are the early adopters who will try something right away, and those who will not do it unless they're forced to. So I don't have an easy answer to that, but I'd say that it's a process, and providing examples, providing experience, increasing familiarity, and doing it in an environment, getting back to the environment, that is relaxed and conducive to hearing new things. So I wouldn't put everybody crowded into a hot room, forgetting about social distancing, just for the sake of it, crowding into a hot room to tell everybody about a new robot that was just created in Nigeria that we think is going to be great. The environment is you're going to lose half your audience, if not 3/4 of them, before you even start. Having a meal, small group, somebody's home, outside, talking about it, people are automatically going to be more receptive because they're more relaxed.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. And there have been a few comments in the chat. I think I'll just highlight two of them. One was a question that said, can a robot misbehave in a particular environment which it has been modeled to operate, in which it has been modeled to operate? If this is the case, what could be the possible causes, and what are ways to resolve such? And if you have to share any thoughts on this.
Well, the robot will misbehave if something goes haywire inside it. From all your point of view, the robots, well, how do we judge misbehavior? We judge misbehavior by something that's uncharacteristic of the expectations that we have. And then, of course, we have different reactions to it based on the type of misbehavior, as well as the strength of our expectations. So, so could a robot misbehave? Certainly, although one person's judgment of misbehavior might be another person's judgment of initiative. So this is again why collecting feedback from people about it and gathering information is useful. I think that if people are, and this is true for anything really, if people need to know what to do if something unexpected happens, and that's just good planning. We have a fire drill in our building. Everybody should know what to do, where to go when they leave the building, what are the ways to go out, what's the nearest exit to go out, where they need to stand until the drill is over. Likewise, if somebody's misbehaving, or a robot is misbehaving, what is it that they ought to do to handle the situation, especially when we think about, say, situations where somebody's one-on-one in a care situation, or as was mentioned, in a hospital situation and something happens, there needs to be a plan, and I think that would give people more a sense of control.
Thank you. It's actually, it's always a rich discussion whenever people come from different fields. It was interesting, the comments you made when you said, should we classify it as misbehavior or initiative? And I was like, nice one. I've never considered that.
I heard you laughing, right? Yes, I know.
Yeah. Okay. There's one more question, or I think it's a comment, but then it ends with kind of like a question. So Emmanuel mentions that I agree that bias cannot be completely eliminated. However, I kind of find it hard understanding the point that there is no scientific objectivity. I believe there could be scientific objectivity. For instance, mathematics. Mathematics is a tool. As a tool, is widely used because it is universal, and basically it is a priori that no form of experiential bias is needed to verify truth. So, So okay, so let me just finish it. So with this, if for instance there's any arithmetic or numerical error, it's an error by an arithmetician, not by the arithmetics. I think it's the same with mathematical algorithms. I'd like to know if my thoughts at all is correct. Yeah, I'm done.
I think that's a very good point. And when I send the references, that actually was from a woman AI developer who was advocating, of course, for a stronger role for women in AI overall, and the concern about bias. So she may have stated her point extremely, but it resonated with me, and that's why I put it in there. But I agree with you that mathematics perhaps is the purest type of objectivity. It is the numbers. It's a type of universe, but I think the point there was about in development of algorithms, or in even the decision, just based on the discussions that we've had today, what area will I choose to focus on? And so that is, we always need to be aware that it is a person who is involved in that. So trying to think about your point, which I think is a very good one, is there bias, say, in a mathematics textbook? Well, I guess one could argue that one person chose to organize the presentation of the data in one way and one chose a different course of doing it. But again, to go back, I put that in there because that was coming from a couple of pieces that I had been reading that I thought were right on point about recognizing the imbalance in the range of people that are involved in the field, and then maybe the areas that they choose to study. So that was where I was coming from. Thank you.
Can I make a comment on that, please?
Sure.
Right.
Sure. Yes, please.
Yeah. Actually, I agree with Paul in all its entirety, and I'll give 2 examples. Supposing I have, because I know I'm talking to majority of engineers now. Supposing I have a signal and I decide to analyze it using the Fourier transform, it's going to give me a picture of what is the content of that signal in a particular way. Now, I can tell you that if I decide to use a wavelet transform to see the same signal, I'll see something different. Now, that's already a bias. The model I chose forces a bias on what I'm going to be able to, the conclusion I'm going to be able to reach. And in fact, if you look at one of the theories that we have in the machine learning, we talk about inductive bias because we say there's a concept we want to learn. That concept, we don't know it, but we know we have some hypotheses that we can, a class of hypotheses that we can choose from. They might be infinite, they might be finite. So we're looking for one of them that most approximates the concept we want to learn. So immediately we do that, there's a bias. The bias comes from the following. How do we measure closeness? What you choose to measure closeness introduces some kind of bias. So, my interpretation of what Paul was saying, or what other people are saying about the fact that it is not objective, stems from this. Because if I give you a bunch of data sets to learn from, to build a model, that model can only be good as the data set I used to build it. So if I build a model, say for example, which is just based upon the face of Caucasians, and you ask it now to identify, say for example, an Asian face or an African face, it's most likely to give you an error because it has not been trained to learn that. In fact, we're talking about probability distribution here. So we have a probability distribution that we can say encapsulates a particular kind of group of people. Say, for example, a particular kind of faces. We can talk about an average face, for example, in that case. You say, if you look at an average African face, you see certain features there. If you see an average, say, Caucasian face, you see certain features there. If you have trained your model to only learn that and not the whole thing, the PDF, the probability distribution function that it learns, is only restricted to that. If you now tell it to now work in a different space, it's bound to make an error. And in fact, when you talk about the machine making a mistake earlier on, you say, do we say it has made an error or it's showing initiative? Again, it goes back to the same thing. It's because it makes an error because we feel we have training in this particular way to learn a PDF. That's all we're trying to do, actually. We're trying to learn a probability distribution function that generates certain behavior, that generates certain things. Now, if the data set does not cover that, if the exemplars do not cover all that space, of course, when it sees something outside that space, it doesn't know how to deal with it. We call it an error. So there's always a bias. And in fact, in machine learning, it's called the inductive bias. In fact, that's why you call it inductive learning. That's an inductive bias. You give a model. In fact, even the so-called deep learning, the architecture you give, the depth of the number of layers you have, the number of neurons you have in terms of his breadth, the various connections, that is already a bias. You're saying, model will have this form. I just want to get the parameters now. So that's already a bias. So nothing is really, there's no free lunch. Let's put it that way. There is a bias. We have to accept that. There is a bias. Even mathematics has a bias. You build a model, you say, let's assume this kind of space. Whatever, that's already a bias. It could be a different space. You get a different, possibly interpretations, for example. So I'll be a little bit more, I'll lean more towards saying that there is a bias. And there's another point. There's a guy who said, every model is wrong. It's a question of how wrong. Because there's no model that will have all the parameters you need to encapsulate any natural phenomenon. That's just a thought. I just thought I should sort of respond to that.
Okay, thank you. Yes. I want to just say to the group, I'm trying to concentrate and not look at the chat. So if anybody has written something, I apologize if I haven't responded because it would be sort of rude for me to. So I'm relying on you to pull those things out. But thank you all for your participation and comments.
Thank you very much. I think I've gone through, unless there was a private chat I was sent directly to you. I think
Well,
I've gone through everything.
I don't know. I'd have to put my glasses on, and then I would be, you know, that's not. Then I'd create other sorts of attributional problems for myself. So.
Sure, no problem, no problem. That's fine. That's fine. Thank you very much. I think I've run through the comments and the hands that are raised. I'm just doing one quick check once again. Prof. Philip, your hand still raised.
No, yes, I think I have finished. Sorry, I'm sorry. I have put my hands down. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I think at this point, I'd like to thank Dr. Oladepo. I think he joined us from the Department of, I think it's Civil Engineering now here at the Obafemi University. Thank you very much for joining us. We really, really, really do appreciate it that you're here with us. I'm not sure if there's anyone else I have not recognized. We have a number of staff from the Department of Electrical Engineering. You're welcome. I'll call out Dr. Jibril because he was my supervisor both at the MSc level and PhD level, so I had better call him out, otherwise
very smart.
Be in trouble. Yeah, so
social cognition.
Exactly. But I'd like to especially thank Paul. Thank you very, very much. It has been a very, very lovely discussion. The presentation was on point, and I think I speak for everyone when I say we have really, really, really enjoyed this. It's been a lot of food for thought, and as been mentioned, our research will definitely change directions a little bit, and we will apply a lot of things that we've learned here. As was stated earlier in the chat, in case anyone missed it, the recording of this seminar and the slides will be made available on the website. So they'll be uploaded and you'll find them there the next day or two, thereabouts. So they'll be available there.
And so I will send references. I wanted to say I will send references. And again, thank you all for this opportunity. It's very exciting for me as well. And I look forward to where we go from here.